Hello everyone, bringing you the Mannequin of the Month for June 2020 today. Those of you who are familiar with Mannequin of the Month know that these are voted on over on Patreon, on a poll over there. This is a little bit different. This was actually one of the two winners back in April. There was a tie. The other choice was the Mannequin of the Month for May, which was looking at Canadian forces in Europe. This was the other winner, which I couldn't cover at the time as a bonus mannequin, so I'm covering it for this Mannequin of the Month. And this is British forces in Hong Kong during the Hong Kong riots of 1967, specifically the Welch Regiment. As I say, now that I've got my kit and everything, I can get at my kit and so forth, we'll be going back to the normal process of voting on Patreon to choose the Mannequin of the Month each month. But as I say, this is one of the winners from April. The Hong Kong riots of 1967 are very interesting, set against the backdrop of the Cultural Revolution in mainland China, which is infamous. There were actually incursions, if you want to call them that, across the border into the new territories. Police stations were attacked by Chinese nationalists, and it was a very bloody time for Hong Kong in many respects. The internal strife, this is to say the rioting by Hong Kong communists, Hong Kong citizens, was stirred up by against the backdrop of poor labour conditions in Hong Kong, which is undeniable at the time. The conditions for labourers in Hong Kong was the conditions for workers were very poor, and unfortunately things spiralled. The political fallout of the incursions across the border into the new territories was something which thankfully fizzled out. That did not escalate, but the rioting did quite considerably, and there were bombings and beatings by the police. Both sides committed terrible acts, and it was a very nasty time. And the army was called out to support the police, basically, provide more armed men on the streets and to protect property and so forth. The kit we're going to be looking at here is representative of that. The photographs this is based on are of the Welch Regiment, which is why I've specifically mentioned that. We'll, as we normally do, we'll start at the top and work down and talk about the various bits and pieces on the mannequin. The helmet here is the Mark IV. Unusual to see helmets worn in the tropics by British troops, but this is one example of that. Obviously, in riot control duties, head protection very important. And this is basically painted. The photographs show they're black and white, a very glossy finish. So basically, it's a gloss. It's vehicle paint essentially was used at the time on helmets. And normally in the field they'd be camouflaged, of course, but no covering here on urban riot control duties. Rudimentary eye protection. You don't tend to see them worn, but certainly at the ready around the neck is a set of eye shields, anti-dust, anti-gas eye shields, which are ubiquitous. Very flimsy, but rudimentary eye protection there. The basic part of the uniform itself is the JG Airtex shirt, introduced in the very late 1950s and ubiquitous by the mid-1960s. Very popular piece of tropical clothing at the time, made in Airtex, of course. So it's a breathable fabric, not very hard wearing, but it is breathable. And this is, I say, common tropical uniform at this time. The web equipment worn is the 1944 pattern. Now, in this instance, we have two of the later issue pouches slung low on the belt, and photographs seem to show these actually being worn on the belt loops rather than using the hooks. I've made videos looking at these previously, which explains the fittings on the back if you want to go and see those, but these are worn low on the belt. And we have both ammunition pouches around the front here. The system had initially been intended for use in the Far East, of course, in the ongoing war with Japan, but that was nixed, of course, by the dropping of the 2 atomic bombs at the end of the Second World War. It was used in the tropics after the war, used in the Far East, basically as theatre issue with some exceptions. So it was fairly standard in Hong Kong at the time, although of course the 1958 pattern had been introduced. This was still being worn in tropical environments at the time. We'll move this around now and we'll have a look at the left-hand side of the uniform. Looking at the left-hand side of the mannequin here, we can see the bayonet for the self-loading rifle on the side of the ammunition pouch there. Bayonets were carried and were fixed during operations in Hong Kong in '67. Very common to see in photographs. On the sleeve of the uniform here, we have the badge of HQ Land Forces Hong Kong, which is a lovely badge. We'll get a close-up of this now. As I say, here we have a close-up of the badge, and I really like this design. It's a particularly nice piece of British insignia, Obviously we have a red oblong, the horizontal black stripe down the centre, and on top of this background we have a yellow Eastern dragon. And these badges are made as a handed pair, so the dragon faces forward whether the badge is on the right or left arm. These particular examples of the badge are printed, but they were also made in a woven form as well. And the sleeves are not worn rolled up, they're worn full length down to the cuff, as you can see there. Looking at the back of the mannequin here, you can see the web equipment. There's no haversack or anything completely unnecessary in the scenario looked at here. We do have the haversack for the light anti-gas respirator, which was carried at the time. Obviously, if riot agents were being used, tear gas and so forth, respirators would be very necessary from that point of view. So respirators were carried. In this position here, it's easy enough to reach around to the back, pull it open and pull the respirator out. So a convenient place to carry it, and this is what is shown in photographs of the time. The right hand side here on the right hip we have the water bottle in its carrier there, the cup and water bottle. And this is an earlier example with the metal cap. Both are seen in period photographs. Of course the type of the rubber cap was around at this time. Another just interesting feature to look at here is the back of the 1944 pattern braces. You can see how you have the 4 straps coming down there from the broad shoulder sections to support the belt. These extra straps coming around to the side here to support the belt, as you can see there. There isn't a huge amount more to see on the right hand side of the mannequin here, but you can again see on both arms we have the HQ Land Forces Hong Kong insignia. You can perhaps better see here the black stripe behind the dragon, obviously very faded on the other one, but slightly more visible here. The slightly better view of the water bottle in its carrier there on the hip, obviously suspended using M1910 style hanger hooks, which was a feature of the 1944 pattern web equipment. But there's not a huge amount more to see on the right hand side there. As I say, there's nothing extra carried on this side. So there we are, that's the mannequin of the month for June 2020. As I say, the idea of these is to primarily look at the kit and uniform that was worn at the time, not to get into the in-depth of the history of what was going on at the time, primarily to look at the uniform and the kit and equipment. So if you're interested to learn more about the Hong Kong riots, I highly recommend looking online. There's lots of resources available. The actual Wikipedia article on it does give a fairly good timeline of events and an overview, but there are also sources out there that give a bit more in-depth information on it, and I believe there are some videos on YouTube as well covering the topic from different perspectives. So it's worth investigating further if you'd be interested in that sort of thing. I can recommend doing so. It's quite an interesting period of colonial history. That's everything I wanted to cover in this video though. If you'd like my uploads and you'd like to see more of this sort of thing, then please do consider subscribing if you haven't already. And if you're new to subscribing or you've already subscribed, please do make sure you've hit the little bell, the little notification button down below, which will obviously mean you're alerted when I upload future videos. If you really like my uploads and you'd like the opportunity to vote on the Mannequin of the Month going forward, then please do check out the Patreon link down below. There is also a PayPal link as well. If you'd like to support the channel, it's greatly appreciated, everyone who does, and a big thank you to all of you as ever for that. There is also social media as well. There's Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, all linked down below. Photographs of this will of course be posted up on there as well as usual. And if you want to get in touch but you don't really use social media, there is an email address down below as well. But as I said before, that's everything I wanted to cover in the video. So until next time, bye for now.